So welcome everyone. This is Politics and Governance's first ever webinar. Today we'll be discussing how the European Union, its agencies and actors are adapting to Brexit. This webinar and today's topic is based on a thematic issue we published early this year on the topic. Let me present our speakers. We have Edoardo Bressanelli from the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies and Nicola Chelotti from the Loughborough University London, our two academic editors. Then we have our authors, Ulrich Krotz from the European University Institute, Alex Katsaitis from the London School of Economics, and Giuseppe Martinico from the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies. We also have the pleasure of welcoming our discussant, Isabelle Hertner from the King's College London. To all, thank you very much for joining us. Before we kick off this webinar, allow me to provide you all with some information concerning how this webinar will go. So Edoardo and Nicola will share the first 10 minutes to contextualize the issue and open this webinar. Then we have our three authors. And finally, Isabelle will provide some critical remarks on this topic. To our audience, a Q&A is available in the bottom of your screen, so feel free to write your questions throughout the session, which will be passed on to the speakers in the end. For those who have Twitter, you can follow our hashtag WebinarPag, as it's written there, and to comment, discuss this issue, follow the highlights, engage in the conversation, etc. Without further delay, I wish you all a very, very pleasant webinar. Edoardo, the floor is yours.
Okay, I will actually start first. Just one small thing, I guess, Rodrigo. I guess that the schedule you've just shared with us might be slightly wrong. Maybe 30 minutes. There might be maybe it was an old schedule, but I think the order is correct. But anyway, so let's start with the discussion. Thanks to Politics and Governance, and thanks Rodrigo for organizing this. I think it's a nice and new experience for many of us. Thanks to all the contributors to the special issue. I think we really valued your input and your efforts last year throughout the process, and which also coincided with difficult moments for all of us and the pandemic. Thanks, Isabelle, for agreeing to discuss the issue with us today, and thanks to the audience. I will briefly explain the rationale of the special issue, and I will then turn the floor to Edoardo, who will instead talk a little bit about more the general findings of the special issue. So what about the rationale of this special issue with politics and governance? So when Brexit happened, for a lot of good reasons, much of the focus went to the UK. Many people started to analyze or discuss how do we get to the Brexit referendum in June 2016? How can you explain the vote? What are the possible consequences of Brexit for UK politics, for UK economy, for UK policies, etc., etc. Actually, if now we're in a COVID era, so everything changed. But in a pre-COVID era, it was Brexit almost controlled the public debate in the UK. And actually, even people, people started to talk a lot more about politics, engaged a lot more with politics. And Brexit was definitely the theme of the day in the UK. Within the Westminster bubble, it almost became a sort of an obsession. You were going to seminars, it would always talk about Brexit. It was Brexit and Brexit. But what about the EU? What about the rest of Europe? And incidentally, I would say that the only other place in Europe where Brexit was discussed as much as in London was the EU bubble in Brussels. Even if you go into Brussels, in the EU bubble in Brussels, not the general Brussels, again, Brexit was discussed, and it was the only thing that people wanted to discuss with you, especially if you are coming from the UK. But in the other capitals, in the other member states, actually, Brexit was not such a factor. People, European peoples or the audiences in the 27 capitals were quite, I think that they saw Brexit with much more distance. It was not like the priority for them. Not even right-wing parties, although, when Brexit happened, we were all happy. We were all saying, yes, now it's our turn, but not even right-wing parties then took up, continued to use Brexit in the following months. So it was a little bit forgotten. But in the special issue, we asked what impact Brexit has had on the European Union as such, because it certainly was a big shock for the European Union, for the European institutions. I mean, the UK was a big player, economically, culturally, militarily, and so on and so forth. So certainly, taking this big player out would make a lot of would create problems, tensions, and challenges or opportunities for the EU. For the European Union. So if you look at the debate, people started to look at, approach this issue from a more macro level, if we want to put it that way, in a sense. Will the EU disintegrate? What is the impact for the differentiated integration with the Europe? We will move to a different kind of variable geometry and so on and so forth. Actually, a very nice special issue in politics and governance started to analyze the consequences of Brexit for EU policies. In this special issue, we do something slightly different. We look at the actual impact of Brexit upon EU institutions and actors. So how did EU institutions and actors react and adapt to Brexit? How did the Parliament? How did interest groups? How did the Court of Justice? Etc., etc. So we aim to give a first overall assessment, knowing that, of course, more analysis will need to be done in the future. The work we did in the special issues is definitely to offer a preliminary assessment, but we believe that 5 years, because the special issue roughly covers 5 years between 2016 and 2021, allowed us to offer a first comprehensive evaluation of the impact of Brexit upon institutions and actors. Now I'm turning to Edoardo, who will give a brief summary of the findings of the special issue.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you everyone, particularly Rodrigo, to make this webinar happen. Nicola was right when he did say that the narrative about Brexit, in the moment in which Brexit, or rather the referendum, happened, was about a big disruption for the EU, was about another existential crisis. And right now, we may well say that some of those arguments were overstated. But our thematic issue did try to engage with those broad arguments, but at the same time to analyze them specifically and track them down on specific institutions, investigating what sort of change these institutions went on to factor in the impact of Brexit. And indeed, one of the key findings of our thematic issue, which really cut across the different contributions, is on what we would call anticipatory adaptation. There has been plenty of time for the institutions and actors. This was a long, sometimes dramatic, sometimes simply very slow process to unfold, which, as we know, hasn't been completed yet, despite Brexit Day. The European Parliament is voting today on the trade and cooperation agreement. In any case, given those years and given this time, new institutions have been able to factor in the prospective changes. That doesn't mean that the European Union institutions did know perfectly what was going to happen, but they knew that there were some risks associated with Brexit, and therefore did take countermeasures well ahead of the formal Brexit day on January 2020. Therefore, just to make a couple of examples, and I'm sure some more will be made in this talk, the European Parliament has been sort of punishing British MEPs before Brexit Day happened, giving them fewer legislative reports than they had been taking for themselves in the previous legislatures. These were formally, they were full members with voting rights as much as the others MEPs. Nonetheless, they got fewer reports, and in a way, they were pushed to the side in parliamentary work. So that's an example of informal change, of an informal change that the parliament implemented in order to save itself or to keep itself functioning despite Brexit. We didn't investigate the mechanism very thoroughly. It may well be the institutions, in this case, in this example, the parliament, did decide to sideline British members to keep their level of performance high and therefore not to be disrupted because of their soon-to-be exit. There may be an argument, or maybe they could have felt the need to punish the British members, the ones leaving the common European enterprise. Or maybe they felt that giving them the job of legislating as a rapporteur was risky because the UK was going to be soon a third country, and therefore the British interest rather than the European interest may have been defended. Whatever the reason, what we did find in several instances was this was evidence for anticipatory adaptation. The second point is about the direct impact of Brexit, which we did map on a number of cases. For instance, changes in voting weights in the council, different coalitions being formed in the Council of Ministers, or very directly following Brexit, the relocation of agencies. For instance, EDA moving from London to Paris. This was a direct consequence of Brexit, and of course, when that happened, in a way, it is easier to observe the change, even though the consequences may well still be pretty uncertain, as it was argued in the case of financial services. Finally, a more general point about the EU, leaving aside to the further discussion examples for single institutions or actors. What about the EU after the Brexit saga has almost ended? Well, we do argue in the introduction of the thematic issue that the EU has proven to be resilient, using this word, which is very common and popular, or resistant in any case, because the EU has sort of developed a policy-making crisis mode. Moving from crisis to crisis, the EU has learned, it seems, how to tackle such crises, and whatever or whenever the new existential crisis will come, maybe it will not be that existential at the end of the day for the EU. I stop here and I give the floor back to Rodrigo or to our next speaker, Ulrich Krotz. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola, Edoardo. Ulrich, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rodrigo. First of all, let me say a big thank you, a very big thank you actually to Edoardo Bressanelli and Nicola Chelotti for not only having me on the panel, for having us on the issue, which they, I thought, wonderfully put together and really superbly managed. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be part of this. When I say we, I'm not talking about myself in the pluralis majestatis, but I'm including the co-author, my co-author for that piece. That is Lukas Schramm, who is an advanced doctoral student at the EUI. I think he's somewhere with us. I don't see him at the moment, but So this was a joint work, I should stress. Our task, or our assigned task from Edoardo and Nicola, was very much actually to investigate the role, the impact, and the importance of France and Germany, and in particular the Franco-German bilateral connection in European and integration and EU politics post-Brexit. So in a way, this was the continuation of work that I have developed together also with others, in particular, a long-time co-author over the years, to which we refer as embedded bilateralism, which very much investigates the double-sided logic of Franco-German bilateralism and France-Germany at the core of Europe. So this general perspective, we take embedded bilateralism in that sense. This was the contribution for this special issue was one particular study as part of a larger research program, which actually will continue and which has a longer history. Now, let me very briefly just sketch in a very skeletal way, if you wish, some of our findings are the main arguments. I will neither flesh out now embedded bilateralism nor the substance of the paper, but just to give you the grand lines of what we found. So what we conceived of as European integration, EU politics post-Brexit were three main basic scenarios that could be, in a way, the general post, the general map for European Union politics without the UK. The first is you get from the literature is reluctant hegemony, or German as the reluctant hegemon. You get this in the literature. It's been discussed upside down, backwards and forwards. I do not need to refer to that. For various reasons, I am not convinced that this will be really the future. I will just say a few words on this, but this is one big scenario. Second big scenario, not least related to Brexit itself, was decline of the European project at large, or disintegration in selective ways, possibly, of which Brexit itself certainly is an example. I mean, if one of the three largest members leave, that is disintegration, and that could have just been the beginning of a wave of different kinds in policy areas, in pushing things back to member states or in others leaving. Does not seem to be in the headlines at the moment, but was very much one of the big scenarios people were thinking of and had in their minds. That for us was the second one, and the third was a rejuvenated and once again pronounced embedded Franco-German bilateralism at the core of Europe, at the heart of Europe. Some of you may say there may be a big fourth one, which I do not really see. Sometimes you hear a Europe of the new southern axis, with France and Italy maybe taking in Spain and Portugal as a different kind of group or grouping within the EU. The last person who really flirted heavily with this was President Hollande of France. And it abysmally failed as a project. I do not see this really as a very likely fourth scenario. That's why we didn't discuss it in the paper. So the results, or the gist of the paper, is very simply that from these main scenarios of which we could think, for a whole range of reasons, not just for one reason, for a whole range of reasons, we consider a rejuvenated embedded bilateralism France-Germany in Europe by far the most likely. And we find it fairly plausible that this may be one of the big lenses through which to look at European affairs, EU politics in the years ahead. Let me just give a few main reasons why we think this is more likely than the other two, and the fourth in the back of your mind if you wish. One is both France and Germany lose with the UK leaving. Yeah, but in another study, we very closely researched who is losing whom. Now, with the UK leaving, what the EU loses is a state promoting market liberalism, deepening of the single market, open international trade, economic and cultural globalization, the subsidiary principle, opposing EU centralization, and very much pushing NATO over strategic autonomy or independent European security, defense, foreign policy. So in most of these areas, what Germany loses is more than what France loses. France loses a supporter and an ally, especially in foreign policy, security, and defense. But almost in all other areas, including market integration, free external trade, a certain fiscal conservatism, market solutions, all of this will, in relative terms, weaken traditional German positions. Now, I keep this short, it's a much longer argument, but all in all, one logic directly tied to Brexit itself is that we feel that, or we find that German hegemony is something that actually loses rather than gains by Brexit. All aside that, in our view, neither German society nor the German political class is anywhere close to being ready to taking over some kind of soft hegemonic role within Europe. But it seems this is one reason that Brexit undermines traditional German positions. Now, just a few more, even more with the UK gone, we see no other group or no other single state in the European Union, including France and Germany by themselves, not in combination, that can marshal anywhere comparable capacities, resources, including political, material, economic, financial, institutional, perhaps ideational ones as well, that France and Germany can do together. Another reason. We also see no other group or single member states that can, when there are different opposing camps within EU politics, as we often see, can represent opposing camps, and by working out bilaterally possible solutions that in the end others can buy into. Such an opposing camp, what recently has surfaced frequently, was sometimes you get this as the new Hanseatic League or the Frugals on the one hand, typically then represented by Germany, or that Germany tries to bring in. And on the other side is France with the southern states. I put all of this in quotation marks, right? And there is a real cleavage inside EU politics. But what traditionally France and Germany also have done, if they can work out something, they can sell it to those members in the different opposing groups. And therefore, in the end, there can be something that is not stagnation and it is not decline or degeneration, if you wish. And again, we see no other group or single member states that will be able to do that in the foreseeable future. Now, the means or the tools by which France and Germany have done this, we develop a little bit in the paper. I'm not going into it. One is setting the agenda very broadly, building consensus, and wielding coalitions, which I just mentioned. So plug that in here. And not to dive too deeply now into a single policy or political areas, but just to mention a few where we think we see empirically in very recent policy and political debates, the argument that we put forth actually to fly very well, and the relevance of embedded bilateralism. The first is the Brexit negotiations themselves, where I completely agree with Edoardo. The EU has taken a very strong stance of resilience and resistance. A unified EU front, some had it, maybe too harsh, some thought, on the UK. And that has been engineered, that it's called by France and Germany, and by their sticking together across policy fields. Now, with other European institutions, but it was clear that both of them were there in the beginning, exactly formulating this kind of stance during the Brexit negotiations and even now towards the UK. COVID-19 and Corona crisis management, quite similarly, the package that Europe got in the end, 750 billion from the Commission, was initially engineered by France and Germany. It was a bilateral sketch that did exactly what I just mentioned in a little greater length, that it brought in opposing camps in a way that it would be digestible both by the Frugals and by the southern states in a package that in the end was picked up and slightly extended, but only slightly extended by the Commission. And in the negotiations, it was a very strong bilateral collaboration at the core in negotiating and bringing them all in. For reasons of time, I have to leave it at short. Similar logics, dynamics we find in the budget negotiations and in budget politics for the next period. And it would be very difficult, but again, the same logic we see at CSDP, the Common Security Defense Policy, foreign policy and security more broadly remains very difficult. But it seems clear to us, or from our perspectives, that either the two will find something that the others can buy into, or there will be stagnation. So it will be France-German embedded bilateralism in our analysis, or it will not be moving very much, right? And so this conventional wisdom, nothing goes against and nothing goes without France and Germany, the stress is on the end, right? It has been since the beginnings of creation of the original six, it's always been contested, and it's always been true to different degrees across time and across policy domains. It's not a standard truth that applies at any moment, at any policy field in the same ways, but it sticks around. And from all we can tell, it's likely to stick around yet further. In fact, it may become yet again much more center stage than we often have seen it before Brexit became so important and now has been close to being completed. One thing I should say, there remain deep difference between France and Germany. Economic outlook, very briefly, in foreign relations, very different foreign affairs and security defense. Often they feel to be in different galaxies. But that also fits our perspective in the sense that differences coexist. If they can work it out, there's a chance that Europe moves ahead or defends achievements. But if they cannot work it out, it is probably more likely than even before the UK leaving that there will not be much moving in the conventional wisdom formulation. So I think that was 10 minutes. I have a few more notes, but I'm going to cut them out. 10 minutes is enough. Let me conclude with very much thanking you also, Isabelle, for functioning as discussion. It's been a true pleasure to be part of this. And the thanks for this really go to Edoardo, Nicola, Rodrigo. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Ulrich. Alex, the floor is yours.
Rodrigo, thank you for putting this all together. I'm getting the hang of my new headset, so if I'm too loud or too silent, just move your arms frantically. I want to thank, on behalf of David Cohen, who's my co-author on this paper, Edoardo and Nicola, for putting the special issue together. It's been a pleasure working with you, and we've really enjoyed the fruits of this labor, both in terms of the paper specifically, but also of the special issue overall. In our paper, we looked at who has been lobbying Michel Barnier. So who has been lobbying the chief negotiator of the EU? In many ways, the motivation behind this is relatively obvious, or at least to us. The chief negotiator has a lot of responsibility in terms of speaking for the entire EU as he is managing this bittersweet divorce, or perhaps just bitter divorce. So whom he gets to talk to, or who talks with him, indicates at least two things. First of all, it indicates which organized interests have the ability to influence the outcome, or at least aspects of this divorce. And secondarily, it tells us a lot about what agenda the chief negotiator has. So what kind of issues are kind of on the top list of his priorities, or the EU priorities. Going around, or kind of wrapping our heads around this conceptually, we start with a few expectations. Surprisingly, from the empirical side of things, a little bit like Edoardo and Nicola mentioned in the beginning, there had been very little work in this area. So while there was a lot of work looking at who has been lobbying the UK side of things, research on the city, research on banks and lobbying Westminster and so on, there was not much work actually, or not much at all, in terms of who had been lobbying the chief negotiator. So we set out some conceptual expectations kind of to frame this work. One expectation we had, or one expectation we could have kind of drawn from the literature, was a very corporatist one where if you perceive Brexit as a very economic trade issue, then business groups would be the primary organizations, if not the only ones that Michel Barnier would meet. A second, more pluralist approach to it would be that we would expect a broader set of actors, including NGOs and companies and trade and professional associations, meeting with the chief negotiator across the board. So from the UK, from Germany, from the EU level, a broad set of meetings. And then a final expectation we applied was, considering how technical the debate is, it is very likely that Michel Barnier would like to meet a lot with think tanks, organizations that can provide a lot of epistemic, scientific expertise that not only contribute to the negotiations and the discussion, but also allow him to focus on particular areas of a debate that are highly technical, which allows him to kind of cut corners and lead a middle point to bring different organizations together, as he tries to bring together different opinions across member states and across levels in order to have a common unified front as he represents the EU vis-a-vis the UK. The data were somewhat surprising to an extent. The big initial sort of observation of the results of our analysis showed that the population, sort of the groups that Michel Barnier got to meet under consultations, was very diverse. So in many ways, this follows the traditional pluralist understanding of EU interest in mediation, where both business and NGOs and all these different types of groups are particularly have equal access to the policymaker. However, a couple of notes at this stage. First of all, think tanks had a particularly prominent part in these meetings, at least from the overall observation. Secondarily, the types of interests represented were quite diverse. So the organizations meeting with Michel Barnier represent both EU-level interests, but they also represent, to an extent, national-level interests, as well as international interests. So the team, the chief negotiator and his team, have been meeting with a particularly wide array set of actors. However, when we start looking into greater detail, organizations that keep meeting more often or that have been more times with him, it became obvious that a different kind of population reality emerged. So once you start focusing in terms of numbers of meetings, it becomes obvious that there's a type of elite pluralism in the background, where while the population of groups meeting with Michel Barnier is diverse, some groups are more popular or more equal than others. So once you reach at the sort of the top level of groups, the top elite circle, which is about, let's say, 25 out of a total of 115 groups approximately, these 25 groups are approximately holding almost half of the total amount of meetings. So this core quarter of the entire population, or less, 15% of the population, was present in more than half of all of the meetings, or at least half of the meetings. So they have some groups have particularly greater access to the chief negotiator than others. Secondarily, this population is very diverse. However, whereas we can see companies and multinationals mobilized, very few, actually no UK companies. However, there were UK NGOs invited. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting and speaks a little bit to what Edoardo was mentioning in terms of sort of preliminary measures or countermeasures for seeing Brexit happening, or sort of dealing with Brexit before it even happened. It seems that the chief negotiator has taken the approach where the team wants to look and wants to embrace the public voice that is pro-Brexit, pro-Remain from the UK side, and give it a speakerphone from the EU side, but shuts down the UK business side because it's focused primarily on EU multinationals and EU business interests. The secondary aspect of that is that for UK business in the post-Brexit environment, access and influence vis-a-vis the Commission and EU officials in Brussels will have to take primarily place either via multinational space, so UK interests that also have establishments in different EU countries. Or it will have to be by investing heavily in lobbying via third parties. So it's likely that we're going to see a lot of UK businesses opening up offices in Brussels, as well as hiring services from professional consultancies. A third sort of smaller note that comes out of this analysis, particularly when we focus on the elite core of groups invited, is that interest in intermediation in Brussels post-Brexit will have a prominent role, it seems, for think tanks. So whereas think tanks used to be traditionally associated more with Washington, D.C. as of these sort of network builders that work to bridge kind of gaps in a system that continuously changes, they seem to have found a prominent role as well in Brussels as actors that can provide very targeted expertise that brings different coalitions of actors together under sort of a scientific roof, so to speak. And this role is their role is unlikely to grow even further. I think there are a couple of more points that are particularly interesting. I'm just going to talk on one or two very quickly. One thing is that it seems that as UK interests, and particularly business interests, seem to be locked out of EU institutions, so to speak, or will have less access, they will face competition from other international groups. So now UK business interests will be competing, let's say, with Chinese, Brazilian, US interests on the same level. And this is quite a unique and new playing field for them. Just one last point from the EU side of things, it seems that not only the chief negotiator has shown a lot of resilience in terms of resisting UK private interest involvement, but it shows quite interestingly wanting to have sort of a type of input or democratic legitimacy, if you like, by inviting public interest groups at the core of the discussions. So I'm going to stop now. I think I'm at 10 minutes, maybe a little bit over, and I'm going to give it back to you. Thanks, Rodrigo.
Alex, thank you very much. Giuseppe.
Thanks indeed. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks to Rodrigo, to his amazing team, and thanks to Edoardo and Nicola for involving me in this special issue of politics and governance. In my 10 minutes, I'm going to say something about the piece I wrote with my friend and colleague Marta Simoncini, who is assistant professor at Luis Guido Carli in Rome. In our article, we explored the role of the Court of Justice during the Brexit process and the possible impact of the British withdrawal on the composition and the jurisdiction of the Luxembourg Court. The centrality of the Court of Justice, as recognized by the wording of the withdrawal agreement, originated from the existence of a sort of legal knot linking the European and British systems. Here, by legal knot, we meant the web of norms created by years of British membership within the EU. Indeed, community law has over the years contributed to creating new rights that have partly been retained by the domestic norms governing the repeal of EU law in the UK. Another example of the complex contest triggered by the Europeanization of the British system is the famous Miller case, first decided by the High Court of England and Wales, and then by the UK Supreme Court. This case emphasizes the importance of the EU integration for the genesis of a new category of rights. In addition, a series of recent cases concerning the validity of the withdrawal agreement as regards the breach of EU citizenship rights also shows how difficult it is to cut legal ties without breaking fundamental rights. All this means that the EU membership has created a constitutional legacy in the UK that won't be cancelled. In other words, Brexit has produced ties that bind even after the British withdrawal. And from this perspective, the legacy of Brexit is destined to last beyond the individual case of the United Kingdom and to affect the future of the EU legal system. In our article, we have identified some intimations of this constitutional legacy. The main legacy is represented by the Wigman case, a decision delivered at the end of 2018, in which the Court of Justice interpreted Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union, the norm governing the withdrawal, and clarified that the United Kingdom was free to revoke unilaterally the notification of its intention to withdraw from the European Union. In our paper, we strongly criticized this judgment, which had an extra level of complexity to the already difficult negotiations. We also criticized this judgment for the uncertainty it created, therefore the terminology used therein. Indeed, in Wigman, the Court of Justice stressed the precedence of national sovereignty in the decision to withdraw the membership and reverse such a decision over any other considerations of supranational autonomy. In addition, and this is the second intimation of that constitutional legacy, Brexit reshaped to some extent the independence and the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice. Brexit had an impact over the composition of EU courts and upon the mandate of the Advocate General, as we saw analyzing the case triggered by former Advocate General Eleanor Sharpston. It is also likely that Brexit might produce some changes in the legal reasoning and the style of decisions of the Court of Justice, but this can only be tested in the long run, and we don't have, of course, the crystal ball. Another legacy of Brexit concerns the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice, as seen in our article. If Brexit was supposed to cut the United Kingdom's relationship with the Court of Justice, the withdrawal agreement maintained the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice to a certain extent, at least, and also extended this jurisdiction beyond the transition period. The Court of Justice will maintain a crucial role, and even at national level, British judges could take its case law into account as provided in the EU Withdrawal Act of 2018. In this sense, the withdrawal agreement contains an exceptional degree of continued jurisdiction for the Court of Justice as compared to the other treaties with non-EU countries. And it also includes obligations for the UK to apply the structural principles of EU law, namely primacy and direct effect. Apart from the Court of Justice jurisdiction over cases or proceedings pending at the end of the transition period or events occurring before that date, the Court of Justice will also have some jurisdiction over entirely new cases arising after that date. In this sense, as Steve Pierce clarified, there are at least 4 different categories of continued jurisdiction of the Court of Justice. And they have to do with citizens' rights, financial settlements, protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, and finally protocol on Cypriot basis. Concerning citizens' rights, here the reference is represented by Article 158 of the withdrawal agreement, which contains a specific and time limited jurisdiction. Concerning financial settlement, the reference is Article 160 of the withdrawal agreement, which provides for special jurisdiction about the financial settlement provisions of Part 5 of the agreement. In the protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, we also have norms which require the continued jurisdiction of the Court of Justice case law, where the protocol refers to concepts and provisions of EU law, and the same applies to some norms included in the protocol on a separate basis. A confirmation of the continuing relevance of the Court of Justice is also provided by some recent episodes. Last March, the European Commission launched legal action to force the United Kingdom to recover 100 million euros in tax exemptions awarded to multinational firms operating in Gibraltar. And always in March, the European Commission announced its decision to trigger legal proceedings against the United Kingdom for a breach of the Northern Ireland Protocol. On the one hand, these events really risk further escalating the tensions between the United Kingdom and the European Union. But on the other hand, they also confirm the persistent importance of the Court of Justice and its case law. Thank you very much for your attention.
Giuseppe, thank you very much. So we have had the presentations from our authors, and now Isabelle, if you can send your remarks on the issue.
Right. So can everybody hear me? Yeah, good. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me today. It is a huge pleasure to discuss this special issue. Congratulations to all of you for being part of this. And I find it particularly good that Politics and Governance is an open access journal, because a lot of academic literature is really expensive to access, and this one is free to download for everybody. And I think that has to be mentioned as well. So I think this is a really important contribution and a very timely one, because now we know what kind of Brexit we got. It took a long time to materialize, and as time went by, we knew it would be a harder and harder and harder Brexit. So at least now we know where we are, and this special issue comes at just the right time to take stock of that. And I'm also extremely pleased that it focuses on the implications of Brexit for the European Union, because as Nicola mentioned earlier, the initial literature focused very much on the UK. But of course, the rest of the EU, or the EU 27, is much bigger. This affects a lot more people. The effects might not be as immediate and harsh as they are on the British, but it's a huge group of people, and so this is where we should be looking at right now. And I think the special issue teases out the politics, the policies, and also the polity in all of this. So the implications of Brexit on the EU's politics, policies, and the polity. So it takes a broad lens, which is to be commended. Now, the interesting findings of the special issue, I mean, you've heard a lot of them already in these presentations, so I don't want to repeat anything of that, but I think what I found most notable is this resilience of the EU in the face of Brexit, because we have been through severe crises over the past decades. We've had the Eurozone crisis, and we've had the refugee crisis, and it didn't show the EU in a very good light, and it created deep divisions between the member states. And I was rather surprised to find the EU so united over Brexit, and that there weren't more open divisions emerging. And this does come across in this special issue. So this is an interesting and very relevant finding. Also, this recent boom in this literature on disintegration, yeah, that literature is still relevant, and it is interesting, of course, after Brexit, but I think we can now take it with a pinch of salt, because Brexit is not a success story. And apart from some small, well, relatively small challenger parties on the margins of the party spectrums, no big mainstream party in Europe wants to wants to promote another exit of the EU anytime soon. I mean, of course, and this also comes across, there will be some changes post Brexit for the EU. Interesting, I thought, was Ulrich and Lucas's contribution on Franco-German leadership and its reinvigoration. I also thought what was interesting was about the financial regulation. Now that, after Brexit, London's status as the financial hub is is diminished, of course, and Germany and France are trying to lead in that sector and impose some more regulations. So that was also an important point that this special issue made. And another one that I thought was relevant to highlight is also the issue of a social Europe. So with the UK leaving, is the EU going to become more social? Because as we know, the UK government has opposed quite a few pieces of social legislation over the past decades. And here the contribution that was by Copeland said, no, the social Europe is not very likely because there are other member states who oppose a more social Europe as well. So even without the UK, this is not going to become a more social project. Unless, of course, there will be a left-wing majority in the different institutions. So yeah, lots of interesting and relevant contributions that I enjoyed reading a great deal, and that I think will find a very big readership. Now, moving forwards a little bit, I think, and you've touched upon that in your special issue as well, I think it's rather that the European Commission's handling of the COVID vaccination situation, that actually this is something that has divided the EU more, or led to a crisis of perhaps confidence into the European Commission's handling. And I think Brexit appears to play a role in that it's very much pitched the British versus the Europeans. They are taking our vaccines and who has been there first. So Brexit plays, I think, a role in that. And perhaps this is something that could be researched in the near future. So the Brexit dimension of this vaccination nationalism, or however you want to call it, all of that has, of course, emerged more recently. And I guess a second point I would raise is that the forces that drove Brexit in the UK, so far-right nationalism, a lack of knowledge about the EU really, but also austerity and deprivation, anti-elitism, all of these exist across the EU. So Brexit was one manifestation of it, but they exist everywhere, and they're not going away anytime soon. So I think these will also influence the EU in the future. We know that the populist, the far-right populist group in the European Parliament has been increasing over the past European elections. So I think basically post-Brexit, the EU will have to deal with those challenges, and that's another research avenue for another time, how the different EU institutions and policies are reacting to those challenging times. Yeah, so thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions and answers.
Isabelle, thank you very much, and thank you all for your presentations. Some questions are starting to come, so I will read some of them. Some of them are directed, others aren't. So the first one we get is to our academic editors, but I guess if any of the other authors feel they need to answer, it's okay. So you thought this issue, or this was the issue, came before the COVID, and now with the impact of COVID, if you had to think the issue now, what perspectives you would now choose to follow? What new research this might open? So this is one of the questions. For Martinico, we have a question as well. So you said that the judicial relationship between the two sides will last beyond Brexit. You mentioned some examples. This relationship will last how far beyond, and what are the most crucial areas for the future, which is to stay. Another one is not directed, so I believe I can give you the word to you all. Regarding the vaccination, so the UK is vaccinating on a faster pace than the European Union is. If this proves to be a success for the UK, if it can enhance or boost an anti-European Union movement in other countries of the European Union. And for all, also a final question for now. We'll see if we have some space for more. Now with the end of Brexit, some new challenges will arise for the European Union. Isabelle mentioned some now in her presentation, but for you all, what will it be one of the most important challenge for the European Union after Brexit? So perhaps the first question, Edoardo or Nicola.
Okay, shall I move first? Then Nicola, if you want to add anything, please do jump in. If we were to rethink about the layout, the special issue, thematic issue, as it is called by Cogitatio, Politics and Governance, now, what would change? Well, first and foremost, I think the timing would change, because our contributions and our empirical fieldwork that applies to some of the articles, the ones that did have an empirical focus, stretch up to, let's say, the end of 2019, the start of the transition period, really. And so basically with Brexit Day, or slightly before Brexit Day, our thematic issue closes. Now, of course, there has been a further year and some other months of Brexit, so to say, and of course, empirical developments have been very interesting. I mean, let's take one example, and then I shut up. Take the European Parliament. In the European Parliament today is voting on the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. It's giving its consent on the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. We've been investigating the role of the European Parliament, but of course we had to stop at some point. Now the European Parliament has been playing politics with with postponing the vote on the Trade and Cooperation Agreement and calling for more powers and more involvement. Well, that's one case where more research would be interesting to make.
Just a quick note before I hand to the other contributors. Yes, if we had to think the same issue today, there would be, I guess, a strong push to have something on what Isabelle and the others in the Q&A have mentioned, which is vaccination, COVID, and the European Commission. So to see the impact of Brexit upon this issue, and I think it's definitely I think that the issue of vaccination strategies have definitely been affected by Brexit, not least because the chain of supply would have probably been different in case of no Brexit. If we hadn't had Brexit, I don't even probably, and it would have been very nice to see if the Commission would have gotten the same powers to organize for the 28 states, and how the chains, as I said, of supply and the production, so I think this is an extremely interesting issue, and I echo what Isabelle say, that this should be an interesting field of research in the coming weeks. So I think that's definitely something I would like to include.
I don't know if in this matter, some hints for future research. I don't know if in this sense, and other of the authors want to provide some quick remarks. If not, Giuseppe.
Thanks indeed for this question. And it's a very technical issue. So I know that I'm the lawyer, so I am already the boring one. But just to make, this simple, I can refer to some cases in which this extended or continued jurisdiction of the Court of Justice is time limited. So, for instance, if you look at the case of citizens' rights, you will see that in Article 158 of the agreement, there are some passages which clarify that the case must, I'm quoting, be commenced at the first instance within 8 years of the end of the transition period. So by the end of 2028, I think. So this means that in theory, the Court of Justice will have jurisdiction over cases raised by British courts at the end, until at least in the end of 2028. So this is a case of time-limited jurisdiction, but consider that this norm is not that problematic because the British courts are not obliged to refer preliminary reference concerning Article 158. There are then other cases of continued jurisdiction of the court beyond the end of the transition period, which are broader, and they refer to all those norms included in the protocols concerning Northern Ireland and Cyprus, in which these norms refer to concepts and categories of EU law. In this case, you will probably see a sort of extended influence, even a sort of indirect influence of the case law of the Court of Justice over British courts as well. So, but if you're interested in this stuff, the best thing is to compare actually the black letter law of these norms, especially the example that I was referring to during my speech. Thank you very much.
Giuseppe, thank you. Ulrich, I believe some remarks now.
Yeah, thank you, Rodrigo. Very briefly to the question, which policy fields will loom large once the Brexit and also the Corona dust will have settled at least somewhat. I think there will be a long list of agenda in the domestic sphere. I will not touch on any of those because mostly the others are the internal policy domains. One remark about one perhaps in a moment, but since I'm also a little bit an IR guy, let me single out one, and this is for the EU, pan-Europe, if you wish, to find its role and place in 21st century world politics, which I think will be something that it has risen very strongly over the past 15, 20 years. and it has a little bit, only a little bit, been now in the shadow of Brexit and of Corona. But as soon as the dust there settles more, the more this will come back. International politics, world politics of the 21st century will be global. In my view, there is no question about that. And the answer of what role the EU wants to play as a whole, or the combination of the Union and the foreign policies of its member states, is surely demanding, asking for more concrete answers than the EU and its member states has given so far. So for that, I have no doubt will be coming back full time and big time. And I think it's going to be very important and very interesting for us. Internal policy, the list is long. I leave this to the other panelists or the other authors. One thing I want, just a footnote, if I may. I think people our age, including those a good deal older than we are, or maybe I'm the oldest, I don't know, have not experienced the curbing of civil liberties in ways we have experienced over the past year plus, as part of reacting to the COVID pandemic. And one thing I wish will be also part of the agenda in the time ahead is that I think we all experience that civil liberties and freedom is nothing that comes by itself and that comes for free. So as we hopefully soon can resettle into more normal lives, I think that we demand back and perhaps demand even more civil liberties as something that we learned is as a political achievement. It's nothing naturally given. I would be very happy if that would be part of the package to come, post-Brexit and post-COVID as well. I leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulrich. Thank you. Alex, can we hear your intake on this?
I mean, I think my input would go in terms of questions around sort of social Europe post-Brexit and kind of its evolution after this. I think, at least from my sort of more interest group, organized interest perspective, what I think is more likely to happen in terms of social Europe and sort of political mobilization is to see probably less civil society and more of an institutionalization of these discussions. So this might involve sort of movements on the street and connections with political parties, but the discussion of having a more social Europe is likely to take place through the European Parliament and national parliaments, rather than civil society, which was kind of the more traditional way of doing things the past few years. I think even though there will be member states and sort of transnational cleavages to stand against this, the discussions are going to be much more institutionalized now with the UK's departure, and civil society will have sort of a different role to play rather than that one. So in an almost counterintuitive way, the exit of the UK, which has a much more pluralist sort of interest in mediation, will lead to less civil society mobilization, at least in terms of social issues in Europe, and more politics and institutions on this. Yeah, I think that would be my final take on this.
Alex, thank you very much. Thank you all for this webinar. I think it is very fruitful for all our followers to know a little bit more about your research and about what you publish, but also the impact it has in our lives and for the future. We have addressed also some future challenges and hints for research for all of you and our attendees, most of them researchers as well. I don't know if anyone wants to add some final remarks or conclusion, but if not, I will now thank you all for your presentations. Thank our attendees. The video of the webinar will be available in our YouTube channel. All of you will be notified soon about this. You can also check in the website of the journal Politics and Governance, the thematic issue that serves as base for this webinar. We look forward to see you all in our future events, the first of many more to discuss these issues. Edoardo, Nicola, Giuseppe, Ulrich, Alex, Isabelle, thank you all for this, and thank you for the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.